Good day, everyone. This is Ibrahim, spiritual community animator. And today I would like to go over the courage PowerPoint that I have for the Cycle 3 students. Now, maybe you missed out on the presentation and you'll get like part of it, what we did in class. Or maybe you saw it like a part of, I came to your class and you saw part of it. And you know what, you're sat watching this part for the second time as much as I can. I'll make it a little bit different in case you saw the in-class presentation. You'll still learn and you will still be able to benefit from this presentation. So let's talk about courage. Okay, so I like to start with a brainstorming session, just a small brainstorming. What do you think courage mean? What does courage mean? What is courage? If you think about it, what is courage? Hmm. So maybe you could share a few answers, right? Take a moment to think about it. Think about like moments where you had to practice courage, right? Where like what needs to happen for you to say, you know what, yeah, that's a moment of courage, right? He or she is courageous. Okay. Um, so let's go over what I have, right? Normally I would hear from you, but again, this is just a video of it. So courage is your ability and willingness to push through difficult challenges, right? Um, Sometimes it might be you might feel like embarrassment, you might feel like hesitant. That means you're not sure whether to go forward or not, right? Pushing through obstacles, challenges, despite feeling embarrassment, fear, or uncertainty, right? Also, courage, um, it has to be positive, right? So you use your courage to make positive choices. So, for example, okay, if it's not positive, we cannot count it as courage. All right. Only if it's positive, then can we say, you know what? Yes, this is an act, or this is action. We could label as an act of courage. Okay. So, for example, and that's the example that I gave students in class. Let's say, you know what, somebody comes to you, or even you think about this idea yourself. You have that thought of, you know what, let me go steal something, right? It's something that you feel afraid, there's a bit of embarrassment. Oh, what if like people see me or I get caught? You know, there's fear, you're hesitant, you're not sure. If you push through and you actually like go ahead and you steal whatever, like that, whatever item, you know, is in this example, could we say that this is a moment of courage? No, right? Of course not, because it's not an act of it's not a positive thing to do, right? Stealing force is not a positive thing to do. Therefore, we cannot say that this is an act of courage. All right. Only if it's positive can we say yes, this is an act of courage. So it's your ability to push through obstacles, challenges, to make positive decisions, right? And courage as a virtue, by the way. Remember we talked about virtues and with the difference between virtues and values, right? One of the main differences is that virtues are inherently positive, right? They're only positive, and courage as a virtue, it has to be positive. All right. Okay, so you could break down courage, and I'll keep on moving this so that you can see the text. Um, courage, you could break it down into extraordinary acts of courage and ordinary acts of courage. Like big acts of courage, like, you know, acts of courage that changed history, right? Moments in history where people used their courage and maybe they spoke out against injustice, or they used that courage that they have, and not only they changed their environments and their societies, but they also like that impact resulted in changed history. So that's what we call about like, well, that's what I mean when I say extraordinary acts of courage, right? So that's when I mean it for specific individuals, right? We're going to see a few names soon. Also, you can think about like certain jobs that require a lot of courage, right? A lot of courage. Certain jobs that, you know, we have in our societies. We have people that are doing those jobs. Sometimes we see them every day, and they require a lot of courage. All right. So in that category of extraordinary acts of courage, could you think of people that changed? I don't know, like because of their actions, history took a different route. Like we had a change in history. Could you think about jobs that people do every day, that, you know, require extraordinary courage for people to do, right? Could you brainstorm? Could you take a moment, think about it? So when I did the presentation in class, a lot of students mentioned, firefighters. That takes a lot of courage, right? Being a police officer, that takes a lot of courage, right? Hey, it's still November, right? And we talk about Remembrance Day, so let's tie that back in. What about soldiers, right? Does that take a lot of courage? I think so, right? So things that paramedics, the frontline workers. Um, so there's few jobs that we see every day, right, that are there in our society around us that require a lot of courage. Okay. um let's go over now a few individuals, right? And when we talk about individuals, that's where you could maybe think about Martin Luther King Jr., maybe you could think about Malcolm X, maybe you could think about Muhammad Ali, and also to have our Canadian context, right? Because those three names that I just mentioned right now, um, they're not Canadian. So just to include some Canadian courage, to show that we also have that here. Um, have you heard the name of Travis Price? Right. If you're familiar with Pink Shirt Day, I'm sure you heard the name of Travis Price. So he's a Canadian. He was actually, I like that story because I'm sure a lot of you could relate to it because his story is relevant to students. So Travis Price was a high school student. He was in grade 12, right? I know you're still like cycle 3 elementary, but you could imagine yourself. You could imagine yourself when you're becoming grade 12 in the next couple of years. So Travis Price, grade 12 student, he there was a new student that came to his school, and that new student was in grade 9. So the moment he came to the school on the first day of school. Think about your first day of school, right? He was a new student. He came from another school, and he came to school wearing a pink polo, right? And immediately, people saw him. They don't know who he is, right? He's a new student, and so immediately they started picking on him, right? He was pushed around and people were mean to him, people were insulting him, people were calling him mean words. Um, and and that story, by the way, is in 2007, right? So it's not that long ago, right? It's not like it happened 100 years ago, right? It happened in 2007. So when that young boy, grade 9 student, was picked on, and he was bullied almost, right, by others. Travis Price, he was in grade 12. He decided to do something about it, right? He gathered with his friends, and he started that initiative of Pink Shirt Day. So in solidarity, he told everyone through Messenger. I don't know if you guys, maybe your parents could remember that. It's a social media outlet. So imagine like using Facebook or Instagram or whatever outlet you have. He told everyone that, you know what, we're going to come to school wearing a pink shirt, right? So that way, that student doesn't feel isolated, right? It doesn't feel that they're doing something wrong just because they decided to wear a pink shirt. So Travis was able to get, he said, 700 to 850 students out of 1,000 students, right? So imagine if you have 1,000 students at that school, 700 to 800 students came with the next day with wearing a pink shirt, right? So just to show the stand in solidarity. Like imagine how that young new grade 9 student, how did he feel when he saw that solidarity by Travis Price and everybody that contributed, right? So that's a great act of courage, right? When you see an act of injustice, when you see something mean happening in front of you, right, you doing something about it, right, is an act of that requires courage. And again, that story happened when Travis was in grade 12. He took that initiative, he showed some leadership skills, and he used a lot of courage, and he gathered like a lot of his friends and he, for a lot of people to wear a pink shirt in solidarity. And that's what we do actually on Pink Shirt Day, right? We're going to talk about it later when the time comes. but I just wanted to also insert it here as an act of courage, right? And one of the quotes that I want to share from Travis Price is the goal here when he was doing that initiative, right? He was looking back at it. He said the goal here is to make a day where kids can go to school and not get bullied. Okay, so even up to this day, we still talk about Travis Price. We talk about the Pink Shirt Initiative, and that legacy, right, started. And when did he do it? When he was in grade 12. Okay, so that's a little bit of Canadian courage that I wanted to include. So now let's look at some of the ordinary acts of courage, right? Regular acts of courage that you could do maybe every day in your life, right? Because courage, again, it's not, you could have extraordinary, and we mentioned a few examples, a few jobs, and you could have ordinary acts of courage. So what do you think some of the ordinary acts of courage, like what do you do that requires a little bit of courage, right, for you to do? Maybe for some, and I heard that in classes, public speaking, right? Public speaking might require a little bit of courage. So if somebody has to do a presentation in front of a whole class, a presentation, like a part of an assembly where a student has to present, read a poem, sing a song, just being in front of an audience, really, that's something for people that requires some courage, right? And we're very familiar with that, right? So what about being kind to all kinds, right? The people that maybe look differently, dress differently, speak different languages, have different religious backgrounds, people who might not people who dress differently than you, right? Their dress code is different. So being kind to everyone, being kind and welcoming to everyone, right? So for some people, that will take them some courage to go out and try to be kind to everyone, even not just necessarily those who physically appear different, but like even being kind to someone who is mean to you, right? Somebody who said something mean, you being kind to that person requires a lot of courage, right? Other daily examples, imagine on your first day of school, right? Maybe for some raising their hand, for some students raising their hands to participate, that takes a lot of courage for them, right? Especially if you're a new student, you're very shy, you're very reserved, you're not sure whether you got the answer right. There's that moment of embarrassment that you're afraid of. So even raising your hand, a simple act like raising your hand, might require courage. Okay, admitting when you're wrong and moving on, right? That takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage for someone to say, you know what, yes, I'm sorry, I did a mistake, my bad, it's my fault, right? Accepting that you did something wrong, apologizing for it requires a lot of courage. Oftentimes people, their first response is when you ask them about something, when they're faced with something, their first response is to freeze and deny everything. No, no, not me, not my fault, I didn't do anything, right? So their first response is to kind of project it on other people and blame everybody else instead of just taking a moment, assessing what happened, and if you did something wrong, accepting it, right? I have a small quote here by Bruce Lee. Maybe some of you know him, a martial artist. Bruce Lee is a martial artist. You could even say he's a philosopher. He had a beautiful quote: "Mistakes are always forgivable if one has the courage to admit them." Right. What he's trying to say is that it's easier for people to forgive your mistakes if you just admit it. What do you think about that? Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? Do you think if you accept, I mean, if you admit your mistakes, people are going to be more willing and more likely to forgive what you did by admitting and saying, you know what, yes, my bad, I made something wrong, I did something wrong, and like owning up, right? Does that like make it more forgivable for, like, does that make your actions more forgivable? What do you think? Right? Take a moment to think about it. Okay. Being honest, sometimes it requires a lot of courage, especially if there are consequences that you'd have to face, right? The example that I gave in class is like, imagine you're at home or you're in class and you know what, you broke something, and then you're asked like, what happened, who did it, what's, people want to know like what happened, and you're afraid that, you know what, yeah, if I say I did it, I'll get some consequences or whatnot, right? So being honest does require courage. All right. I'm sure you could think about different acts of courage that or ordinary courage that we do every